Please join me in welcoming our first keynote speaker for the day, Michael Irish, to share his thoughts on blockchain innovation in healthcare and life sciences. Michael?
Thank you. After you. Thank you. So first of all, my friends who are in TV production call this a cold start. It's early in the morning. It's the first day of a conference. It is my role and responsibility to make sure that you are engaged and focused. It would help if I knew the audience just a little bit before I actually kind of deep dive into some relatively complex stuff, which hopefully will not anesthetize you. How many of you are providers in healthcare? Okay, that's awesome. How many of you are payers? Okay, no payers. How many of you are in actually med tech? Okay. And then how many of you are a small and medium-sized business? How many of you are a large business? How many of you know what blockchain is? Oh my God, okay, great. So the way that I'm going to basically characterize my comments today is talking to you not only as a CEO, because many of you are, but also thinking about how we make decisions about blockchain as a board of directors or as a CEO pitching the board of directors. This is not going to be an IT talk, and since you guys already know what it is, I'd like to hover and focus on the business value. So if that's amenable to everybody, that's how we're going to go forward. And we'll have about 25 minutes, maybe a little bit less, and then a couple minutes for Q&A. So first and foremost, who knows who Neal Stephenson is, the author who wrote Cryptonomicon? Okay, I think I see one hand. This is a book called Cryptonomicon. It was written about 20 years ago. If you want to understand Bitcoin and if you want to understand blockchain and perhaps some of the science fiction underpinnings of how we got to where we are, I strongly encourage you to read it. If you read the chat rooms, both open-focused and closed-focused, you're going to find that Neal Stephenson's name is increasingly linked to Bitcoin and blockchain. And if you don't know, Neal is actually pretty close friends with Jeff Bezos. So there's a lot of interesting dynamics that are actually happening which impact all of us. So Stephenson writes this book, Cryptonomicon, and no, I'm not getting a commission on that. And then several years later, a gentleman by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto writes a paper on Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And that's really, even though blockchain is the foundation upon which Bitcoin operates, okay, Bitcoin has really driven the market. And so, I guess slide is there. Okay. I've been involved directly and indirectly with blockchain for about 2 years. The first meeting, which was a private meeting, and I kid you not, at a so-called undisclosed location, guys with guns, billionaires in the room. There was over $1 trillion of market cap and wealth in that room with less than 25 people. So some very serious people are taking blockchain very, very seriously, all right? IBM has got over 1,000 people working on it today. I can't say who it is, but there's a corporation in Japan that has a budget that is in the hundreds of billions of dollars. And yet 90% of the people that are actually talking about blockchain today really cannot explain to you what it is, all right? Okay. So this is not a session to basically talk against blockchain or against Bitcoin, but I want something to be very clear. Until we basically have greater evolution and efficiencies, blockchain, if you're talking about a public network, even a private network, and if you're talking about Bitcoin, is a little bit on the inefficient side from a processing standpoint. One Bitcoin transaction, okay, which is a public blockchain ecosystem, takes the same amount of energy as boiling 36,000 kettles of water, okay? If that continues to grow exponentially, Bitcoin could end up consuming the entire power needs and requirements of the planet Earth in less than 10 years unless we can actually find a way to make things more efficient. Today, Bitcoin consumes more energy than the entire country of Ireland, both north and south. So you start to get some understanding as to the parallel and concomitant implications of the infrastructure requirements, the power requirements, et cetera, that are required in actually building a blockchain ecosystem, both public and private. So I've already talked about Neil Stephenson, I've talked about Cryptonomicon, I've talked about Satoshi. The bottom line is that it is thought to be that there's no one individual who actually invented blockchain or invented Bitcoin. I've done my level best to triangulate. I know several people who are pretty much considered to be industry leaders. Nobody really knows. At some point, I'm sure it will come out, but nobody really knows. And so for those of us who are CEOs, decision makers, chairman of the board, it's always interesting to be talking about adopting a technology when we actually don't know where it came from. And I submit that to you because right now the hype, the energy around blockchain and Bitcoin, I would put it on the level of extraordinary. And so as decision makers, we have to be mindful of that. I remember one board meeting in particular I was in, and I had blown out my numbers for the fiscal year by threefold. But I was $25,000 off my expense budget, to which the chairman of the board had some issues. What I would observe to you is as this evolves, as this emerges, we have to be mindful about not creating things that we're totally committed to that are going to create a financial trap. We need to do it. As leaders, we need to be in front of this. We cannot be behind it. But at the same time, we have to be very, very mindful about building boundaries around what we're doing so that we actually don't blow our budgets out. What is blockchain? Most of you said you knew what it was. That's good. But at the most fundamental level, it's cryptographically secured, okay, and it's a distributed ledger. And I was actually kind of curious as to what a distributed ledger was, and I'll come back to that. So there's this graphic representation both on my right and my left effectively shows how the system works. And again, I want to remind you all, you can have a public blockchain ecosystem and a private blockchain ecosystem. If you have a private ecosystem, the gains in efficiency and effectiveness and control, even though it's disintermediated, are much tighter. When it becomes public and global, and you have to simultaneously replicate the blockchain on a global basis, everywhere simultaneously, then the energy consumption becomes astronomical. So that's what I would observe. I actually can't read my own slide from this vantage point, but basically the key thing to remember, Bitcoin has really taken a lot of the air out of the ecosystem. Bitcoin has emerged from blockchain. Bitcoin cannot exist without blockchain. So the way that I think about this is that we are really ultimately looking at a new IT platform from which thousands upon thousands of new things can emerge that can create value. And that's the opportunity as I see it, which is in front of us. And so I think we all understand that. You all basically qualified yourselves as understanding what this is. It's decentralized. It is encrypted. It is redundant. I would observe one thing. There's a lot of things out there that are the same, if you actually take these as being definition points. But blockchain is different because of its auditability, its permeability, and its ease of adoption. So, military-grade encryption. So, part of my career, before I decided to get into healthcare, and I am in healthcare, had to do with national security and all sorts of stuff. And so military-grade encryption means something to a lot of people. It means something to me. And I still talk to people who deal with encryption. In fact, there's somebody in this room who does encryption and artificial intelligence at the same time. I've also been exposed to quantum computing some 13 years ago. And the people who are in the business of actually breaking codes and cracking codes and making codes are all looking at quantum computing, not as a panacea necessarily, but as a substitute for brute force attacks. The one thing to understand in a public network for blockchain is that you can hack it, and it's been hacked. This is not a perfect ecosystem. If you can gain control of enough of the nodes that are actually touching the blockchain network, then you can basically effectively turn the tide. And quantum computing is one of these wild cards for all of us in this room from the standpoint of protecting what we have. But the thing to remember is that military-grade encryption is pretty good. I don't see on the near front, people taking quantum computing and actually hacking any of our companies represented in this room, but it is something to observe. This is hackable. A lot of people basically say it's not hackable. It is hackable. And in fact, I believe it's the Hackers Conference that's actually held here annually. So if you talk to those guys, they would go, yeah, we can hack it. So something to remember, it's not perfect security, it's excellent security. So Bitcoin versus blockchain, I think I've basically already delineated the fact that Bitcoin is an extension of blockchain, okay? However, how many of you have something to do with supply chain? You're all providers, so you have a supply chain, right? How many of you actually touch a supply chain, have oversight for a supply chain? Okay, not a lot of you, but some of you. There are deals that are being done right now around supply chain in general, industry neutral, all the way from agriculture to healthcare, et cetera, that are well in excess of $1 billion. When you start taking a look at supply chain contracts, especially international transactions, supply chain is one of those areas where there's a tremendous amount of energy. And again, supply chain neutral, it can be HR, it can be your contracts. There's a number of different areas and applications for where you can take this. And the other thing is that when we start talking about Bitcoin and we start talking about tokenization, the question is really, what is the token? What is the token for? You talk to a lot of people who are involved in blockchain, and they want to have a token for virtually the entire, a number of different things. One of the questions that you need to ask yourself is, do you actually need to be generating tokens? All right? Tokens are not necessarily symbiotic with blockchain. Blockchain can be, again, it's a ledger. It's an auditable, impermutable ledger that is transparent across all points of contact. And that is bold, that is strong, that is a revolution. And when you talk to people who are leaders in blockchain, sometimes it gets a little bit annoying. They will talk about this is a revolution. It may well be, but I think we're in the early days of it. So the evolving paradigm that we have is we have data, we have agreements. Agreements are contracts in one form or another. Blockchain is an easy and efficient way to basically generate contracts between vast numbers of people and stakeholders and shareholders simultaneously. And if we do it right, we derive value. 70% of the gains that are expected over the next few years, 70% of the gains, not net new revenue, but gains, are anticipated to be radical improvements in efficiency. A deal that's being done in the Middle East right now, when they started analyzing all of the contracts, letters of credit, et cetera, that basically go into their ecosystem, it consumes a vast percentage of their profit margin. Okay, so if we can reduce inefficiencies in our contracting, our paperwork, our paper load by 70%, that's a story that for those of you as CEOs or other senior executives or as a board can tell your shareholders, that's some good news. That's return on investment. But the question on how you get to the return on investment is where I'm going to put the onus of the rest of the conversation. Okay. This is really important. So again, going back to the board construct and being a CEO, there is artificial intelligence, which most people have no idea what it really is. Some of you do. There is machine learning. We've heard that too. If you want to get somebody at a cocktail party after their second screwdriver, ask them to tell you the difference between artificial intelligence and machine learning. And then you can actually go one step further and ask them what predictive analytics is. Most people actually don't know. So, the healthcare industry, in fact, so I'm a healthcare provider. The amount of fax traffic and the amount of ink toner that we actually burn in the course of a month, at first I thought there was a mathematical error in the budget. But an astronomical amount, regardless of EHRs and everything else, an astronomical amount of communication these days when it comes to patient records and other documentation is still being done by fax. All right? So there's phenomenal things that we need to be doing as executives, whether it's digital transformation so that we're not depending on fax machines. There is, what do we do with machine learning? What do we do with predictive analytics? Let alone regressive analytics. How do we actually reduce costs in an ever-depressed, compressed economic environment, whether you're on the private side or the public side? So there's a lot of different things competing for resources. So again, you as leaders have to ascertain the balance of where you're going to place your priorities. And it wouldn't be the first time or the second time or the third time where I've really been focused on something else at a strategic level, had my CIO come in, and I said, go run with this. Next board meeting or 3 months later, it's like, yeah, boss, well, we got this done, but we need to increase the budget by X, Y, Z. It's really quite important that you guys make sure that you are on top of this, that you're aware of it, that you're listening to the industry leaders, that you're in trade associations that deal with this so you know what's up to date, but make sure to balance your priorities, because otherwise you can radically dilute yourselves as an enterprise, as an organization effectively. So the business value, I've already mentioned the construct of smart contracts. Oddly enough, smart contracts have been around for quite some time. One of my friends, who's not here today, was in fact the CEO and inventor of a company called DocuSign. Has anybody heard of that? Okay, right. It went nowhere. It went nowhere. So smart contracts have been around for a long time. It's somewhere now after she sold her company. But we have to remember that every time somebody basically talks about smart contracts and other things, these initiatives have been driven before. So you've got to make sure that as you're doing your IT initiatives, right, that the business process owners are in lockstep with what's actually going on, so you don't go curvilinear and invent something that's actually already out there. If you have a smart contract that involves 10, 15, 20, 30 different parties, then blockchain can shine. And it really does give you those gains in efficiency, right? So it's important to keep your education up to par on a business level and on a technical level. Be engaged and involved, if you're not already, I assume you are, in consortiums that are really looking at pushing the envelope, but continuously challenge them, continuously push them on what's actually out there. And as a CEO who does not believe in reinventing the wheel, make sure that your IT departments, make sure that your staff and your management are not reinventing the wheel, because a lot of them are going to want to do that. So make sure that you're getting as much as you can off the shelf, because in my opinion, from an IT stand, the gains in efficiency will be astronomical. All of you are responsible for the enterprise point of view. That's why you're at this conference. So make sure it doesn't get into a rabbit hole from an IT standpoint. So business models and new strategies are emerging. When you can do something, whether it's in a public or a private blockchain ecosystem, everything changes simultaneously, everything is transparent, everything is auditable. And to the degree that you want to make it, secret or non-secret, open, closed, that isn't being done before blockchain, I submit to you. And if it was being done before blockchain, I don't know about it. And if it was being done before blockchain, it was being done at levels of inefficiency that are kind of astronomical. So we are in the early days of this, which is good because you're in this meeting. You understand that whether you like it or not, it's going to impact your business. Either you're going to drive it or your partners are going to drive it, and we're all part of one of the most complex ecosystems on the planet, especially in the US. So be in front of it, be able to raise the hand and say, I'm not sure I agree with that, but either way, you're either in front of it or you're behind it. Challenges. I'm not sure why, but the note that I had under scalability is not there. When we go back to the teapot example that I had, this has challenges as it relates to scaling and speed. That is driven by a number of different variables. Some are intuitive, some are not. One is that computing power is absolutely critical. Number two is persistent connectivity. If you lose either of those variables, then simultaneous replication across your ecosystem becomes problematic. And remember, it can take up a lot of your infrastructure, a lot of your ecosystem, both on processing power, memory, as well as your pipe. So, security, I think we've already talked about that. Standardization. Right now, this is literally, for lack of a better way of putting it, the wild, wild west. And if you want to be a thought leader in this, the wild, wild west is a really good place to go if you got the right gun and the right horse. So all of you in this room, I was very impressed by the amount of people that actually know what blockchain really is. You have the chance to drive standards for the industry and work in partnership with, the Optums, the Uniteds, the IBMs, all the other very, very large enterprises that are out there that are actually trying to figure out what are the vertical solutions as it relates to healthcare. But the net is that there has to be a lot more communication between all of us as a peer group, because we're all interdependent on each other if we actually want to have a shared ledger at the end of the day. So, what's blockchain? It is a strategy, and it's a technology platform. It does create new business models for sure, no doubt about it. And it is very poorly understood. Most of the blockchain presentations that I've been given, thank you, I actually really couldn't figure it out. So it's taken me a while to synthesize. So we need to basically have a common understanding insofar as where we're going, the direction and vector. So I think I can go over this. I think you guys already understand that. So by industry investment, I spent the last 2 weeks putting this presentation together, and I was actually trying to find one common number insofar as how much money is actually going into this for healthcare. There's no one common number. And I was a little surprised by that. So I contacted everybody that would actually have the number. They all had different numbers. Some of the numbers are, 2.3% of net aggregate investment in blockchain overall is healthcare. I'm not sure that I buy that when compared to other industries. So what the real number of total industry investment is, I'm not sure. But again, reminding you, IBM has 1,000 people working full-time with a very, very robust R&D budget behind them to build vertical solutions, and healthcare and insurance are really their top two priorities at this moment. And they don't tend to tell you all their numbers. Hype cycle, who knows Gartner? Gartner? Okay. I encourage you to look at Gartner's report on blockchain. I have used Gartner for some 20 years now in a number of different industries where I've been CEO. And if you basically take a look at the red arrow, basically it means that healthcare is right at the beginning of the evolution curve, right at the beginning. And so this chart is delineated over 5 to 10 years. It goes all the way through the hype cycle, and then it goes to the trough of disillusionment. And then ultimately where you really start to reap the rewards are in the plateau of productivity. And if I hadn't been a company that was being two companies actually, being monitored by Gartner and actually watched how they got it so right, I probably wouldn't have this slide up here. But every industry that I've been in, they were right. So what this basically says is we're at the beginning of the hype. We're trying to figure out what in the world this is. So as decision makers, as thought leaders, bear that in mind. And I do encourage you to get the chart. It's awesome. Business value, I think we've already talked about a number of things. So if you can basically do contracts faster, if you can actually have an acceleration in interaction between your customer, between your partners, et cetera, your customers will be happier, they will come back, you will make more money, and you will reduce inefficiency, all right? Fraud mitigation. We all know how much of a problem fraud is. We talked about the encryption, we talked about the distributed ledger and things of that nature. All these things help to reduce fraud, which is a tremendous and sad part of our business. So those are just 2 points. And then transparency. You can make this as transparent to the public and to your partners as you choose. It's up to you. Where blockchain can shine. So you have static registries, you already know what those are, and then you have dynamic registries. Those are both 2 very powerful areas. We already talked about fraud. Smart contracts, again, with a number of different shareholders and stakeholders. That is very, very efficient. And again, I already mentioned the fact that 70% of the value is going to come initially from cost savings. It is not too early to think about that strategy. Hype versus reality. Dig into things when people tell you things. It's not uncommon for CIOs to come in and tell me something and I gloss over because I really don't know what they're talking about. And sometimes a CEO or a chairman of the board, and I'm both, doesn't really want to say, Bob, I really don't know what you're saying, but we've got to move on to the next subject line. Make sure you're able to distill what's actually real and what is not. McKinsey findings basically says that in the healthcare space, there are rewards to be gained today. I agree with that. You just need to identify what those are, remain focused, match your peer group, benchmark what you're doing, and you can basically get rewards today in fairly short order. My end observations. Again, I've been talking to you as CEOs and a board of directors. Know what this is, be aware of it, be in front of it, don't get surprised by it, and drive the standards. And if you do next year, when I see you here, we can all talk about things that you've actually been able to benefit from. There's a ton of stuff that's out there that's already being done. Make sure you adopt that and you test it, and you can benefit. I already talked about supply chain, so I won't be redundant. In the end, we are in the early days. It is the Wild West. When it's the early days, when it's the Wild West, you have the chance to drive the industry standards that are going to impact you downstream. To each and every one of you in this room, be in front of it, get your horse, get your gun, get your provisions, and make sure you've got a good group of cowboys, and you have the chance to drive the industry standards, number 1, and number 2, impact industry verticals that have nothing to do with healthcare. That concludes my presentation. Thank you. Q&A? Yeah. Was it too chilly of a presentation? There's no questions at all? Okay, all right. I hope it provided value. Thank you for your time.